Hello, I'm Valeria Pulignano, PI of the ResPecTMe project financed by the European Research Council. In the ResPecTMe project, we examine digital platforms that match workers and clients in diverse sectors such as food delivery and online freelancing in different European countries. We find that workers on these platforms perform different forms of unpaid labor. Therefore, we ask, why is unpaid labor an inherent feature of platform work, and how can we explain the different forms and extent to which workers perform unpaid labor across platforms? In a paper published in Human Relations, we explain that unpaid labor stems from platforms' control strategies that involve technical and work organizational choices. We find that platforms create two different forms of worker autonomy regimes, namely open regimes and closed regimes, and each regime has a different impact on unpaid labor depending on the skills of the worker. For example, online freelancers have to do less unpaid labor within relatively open regimes, which provide greater control and better access to work in a sector requiring higher skills. Conversely, food delivery couriers are better protected against unpaid labor in closed regimes, which provide market shelter in a sector requiring fewer skills. Unpaid labor is an important dimension of the working conditions of platform workers. We see that. Therefore, in another paper published in the European Journal of Industrial Relations, we focus on working conditions within food delivery platforms, and particularly we ask how product market context and strategies of different platforms such as regional and international food delivery platforms affect working conditions and unpaid labor of platform workers into different institutional contexts such as Italy and Poland. We find that, in contrast to international platforms, regional platforms compete by avoiding aggressive price-based competition. Conversely, they comply with product market regulation, for example, health and safety regulation, and they offer higher quality services. And in so doing, they improve working conditions of food delivery couriers. For example, they offer relatively high pay and predictable and stable working hours. This is how they generate less unpaid labor. Our study reveals that national country context seems to weakly affect the strategies that platforms adopt. However, one explanation for the not found institutional effect could be that food delivery is a very specific sector in the platform economy. This is why, in another study, we examine domestic and care platforms that enter a highly regulated sector in France and Belgium. We ask, in countries with regulated domestic care sectors, how do platforms relate to regulation, and what impact does this have on working conditions and unpaid labor? In a paper published in Transfer, the European Review of Labour and Research, we show that domestic and care platforms in France and Belgium tend to produce informal work arrangements. This means that workers are exposed to the individualized risk of unpaid labor, which involves bearing additional costs without being protected by the platform. In care platforms, we find that unpaid labor can take the form of unpaid additional tasks that workers do to please clients and to obtain good reviews, or the effort invested to figure out whether a job is a scam or represents a risk of harassment. Given these repercussions of unpaid labor on platform workers' work and life, we ask how workers contest their exposure to unpaid labor within platforms. In a paper published in Work in the Global Economy, we examine how food delivery and domestic platform workers gain control over income by using unpaid labor. And we find that food delivery workers increase their income by cutting down on unpaid idle time, while domestic platform workers access clients and pay, which sometimes involves to engage in unpaid labor. Therefore, we argue that studying contentions over unpaid labour contributes to understanding how workers can develop agency in a context of exploitative platform work. This is because workers use unpaid labour to gain control over their income. So we conclude that unpaid labour is endemic in platform work. However, how far and how workers perform unpaid labour when providing services through platforms depends very much on the platform labour governance system, the size, the type of the platform, and also the institutional settings within which the conditions for platform to perform a work is in fact created. We also see that workers can contest unpaid labour as agents of change.